Bad times for lyric poetry. But I know only the happy are beloved. Their voices are heard with pleasure. Their faces are beautiful. The crippled tree in the yard points to poor ground, but passers-by call it a cripple, and rightly. The green boats and the cheerful sails in the Sound I do not see. All I see is the torn nets of the fishermen. Why is my only speech that the cottager's wife goes bowed and bent at 40? The girl's breasts are as warm as they ever were. In any poem of mine, a rhyme would seem almost a presumption. In me, quarrel, joyous excitement at the apple tree in bloom, and horror at the house painter's speeches, but only the latter drives me to my desk.
Good evening and welcome to St Hugh's. I'm Tom Kuhn. I'm a fellow of St Hugh's and to a certain extent your host this evening. You just heard David Constantine reading, and over the next hour we will be reading our own and each other's translations of poems by Bertolt Brecht. And we're joined by Claire and Peter and Dominic at the piano. All the translations are our own, with the single exception of the first song that you'll hear. That is John Willett's version of An die Nachgeborenen, to those born later. And our own translations are destined in due course to come out in a couple of years' time in a fat volume of Brecht's collected poems published by the American publisher W.W. Norton. In the meantime, as a taster, next autumn, they're going to publish a small volume of Brecht's love poems, also in our versions, some of which you'll also hear this evening. We hope you'll enjoy them.
The poem I read, Bad Times for Lyric Poetry, was early in 1939, and the house painter's speeches, the house painter is Hitler. The word is Anstreicher in German, a word which also means dauber. As you know, Hitler fancied himself early on as a bohemian artist and painter. Had he kept to that? Anyway, this house painter came to power on the 30th of January 1933. The Reichstag fire followed on the 27th of February, almost certainly started by the Nazis, ascribed to the communists by them. The next day, the next morning, Brecht left Germany with his Jewish wife, Helene Weigel, and their 8-year-old son, Stefan. 2-year-old Barbara Brecht was then in Augsburg with her grandfather, with Brecht's father, and she was smuggled out across the border later on the 1st of April. Why this haste to get out? That night of the Reichstag fire, 4,000 communists were rounded up and taken away. That's when Brecht's exile began. He was first of all there in Prague, in Vienna, in Zurich, Lake Lugano. But by June 1933, they had decided on Denmark, and friends helped them to buy a house, Skovsbostrand, near Svendborg, on the island of Fyn, in August 1933. And that was then their home until May 1939, when war got closer, and they moved to Lidingö, an island near Stockholm. April 1940, after Hitler's occupation of Denmark and Norway, they moved to Finland, to Helsinki. They were there 17th of April 1940 till the 15th of May 1941. In that time, the Finns changed sides. They first fought the Finnish-Soviet War, November 39 to March 40, then joined Germany against the USSR. Brecht and his companions, his family and companions, got out at the last minute through the Soviet Union, the visa for the USA coming just in time. They crossed the Soviet Union. His friend, close friend, lover, and collaborator Margarita Steffin, extraordinarily gifted collaborator, dying of tuberculosis in a Moscow sanatorium, so that they had to leave her behind. They sailed out on the Annie Johnson, a boat from Vladivostok to Los Angeles. Brecht had in his workroom in Svendborg the phrase deriving out of Hegel through Lenin, Die Wahrheit ist konkret, truth is concrete. I've recently been to Svendborg, and if you wanted a concrete image of that place, of this fisherman's house, big house, and the land sloping gently down to the water there, it's the landing stage. There's a landing stage poking out from all the houses along the front, but Brecht would have been peculiar then. To that landing stage came the people who were permitted still to visit him in the time at the beginning of exile. People like Walter Benjamin, who came to discuss matters and to play chess and to work, collaborators arriving to work with him. They stayed effectively just beyond Hitler, just across the border from Hitler, moving on as Hitler advanced, wanting to be as close as possible to the land from which they'd been banished, forced into exile. He was always very insistent. He was not an emigrant. He went into exile. In that company there, in a sort of limbo, we'll read a poem later, we'll hear a poem later about the great exiles, the banished poets. There are common experiences in the experience of exile. And for a writer, perhaps at the heart of it, is the fear of ineffectuality, of becoming forgotten, of the word literally vanishing, of it being absolutely suppressed, so that a life's work simply is undone and is not available. That's the fear that inspired Mandelstam's widow to get all his poems by heart before he went into the camps, so that she could recover them afterwards. The same fear inspired Ruth Berlau, another of Brecht's collaborators, to photograph the lot in tiny format and deposit it later in the New York Public Library, so that the Brecht to date goes into a place of safety. When Brecht finally got out through Moscow, through the USA, and got finally at the end of the war back into a completely flattened and obliterated in many ways Germany, then if you want another image of concreteness, a concrete image of it, it's the suitcases that start arriving through the completely rubbled Germany. Suitcases that Brecht had deposited en route with his writings in. One left with Steffin so that she'd have some to be working on even as she died. Others left at strategic points along the way. If you think our postal service is, as it were, not up to much, think then of these trunks and suitcases arriving through a Europe that was just about pulling itself back together. Plays that hadn't been staged, plays that he wrote. No play for Brecht was finished until he could stage it. When he got back to Germany, the Berliner Ensemble became with his first performance in 1949.
Geflüchtet unter das dänische Strohdach, Freunde, verfolge ich euren Kampf. Hier schicke ich euch, wie hin und wieder schon, ein paar Worte, aufgescheucht durch blutige Gesichter über Sund und Laubwerk. Verwendet, was euch erreicht davon mit Vorsicht. Vergilbte Bücher, brüchige Berichte sind meine Unterlage. Sehen wir uns wieder, will ich gern wieder in die Lehre gehen.
From my refuge beneath the Danish thatch, my friends, I follow your struggle. In these pages I send you, as I have before, a few words, startled from their hiding places by blooded visions above the sound and through the bushes. Use whatever reaches you with caution. Yellowed books, fragmentary reports are my resource. Should we meet again, I'll take up my studies again, gladly.
You who will come to the surface of the overwhelming deluge that covered us, just think when you complain about our weakness of that dark time, which all of you escaped. Yes, we went as often changing countries as changing shoes, through the wars of the classes, despairing each time we found an abuse and no sense of outrage. All the same we realize, even hatred of debasement can distort your face. Even anger at injustices can make your voice hoarse. Oh, we will always hope to prepare a basis for friendliness. Never could be friendly ourselves. You, though, when things are moving forward, so that man becomes a helper to other men, look back on us with indulgence. Questions of a worker who reads.
Who built the 7 gates of Thebes? In books you will read the names of kings. Was it the kings who dragged the stones into place? And Babylon, so often destroyed, who rebuilt it so many times? In which of the houses of gold gleaming Lima did the construction workers live? Where, on that evening when the Chinese wall was finished, did the masons go? The great city of Rome is full of triumphal arches. Who set them up? Over whom did the Caesars triumph? Did Byzantium, so much praised in song, have only palaces for its inhabitants? Even in fabled Atlantis, that night when the ocean engulfed it, the drowning roared out for their slaves. Young Alexander conquered India. Was he alone? Caesar defeated the Gauls. Did he not have so much as a cook with him? Philip of Spain wept when his armada went down. Did no one else weep? Frederick II was victorious in the 7 Years' War. Who else prevailed? On every page of victory, who cooked the victory banquet? Every 10 years, a great man. Who paid the bills? So many reports, so many questions. A children's rhyme, The Plum Tree.
A plum tree grows against our wall. It isn't very big at all. A little fence about keeps careless footsteps out. The little tree would like to be big and strong like other trees. There's nothing can be done. It gets too little sun. That it's a plum you'd never know. On its branches no plums grow, but it is a plum, no doubt. The leaf will bear it out.
Brecht is prolific. You've already had a taste of that. He has an extraordinary range. He wrote songs and odes and ballads and epigrams. He wrote long narrative poems, and he wrote 4-liners. He wrote intimate, personal poems, and he wrote communist marching songs. As well as about war and politics, he wrote poems about theatre aesthetics, about nature, and about love. He's one of the poets of the 20th century who made it possible for later poets to write about everything. He wrote, especially in Exile, about his daily activities and concerns, and about the material objects that surrounded him. He even wrote an ode to his transistor radio. He also wrote children's rhymes. That last rhyme was for his own son, Stefan, and the reference is to one of the trees in the land around the house in Svendborg. But this next poem is personal in a much more profound and intimate way. It's one of a series of sonnets, love sonnets, that Brecht wrote to Margareta Steffin, and she wrote sonnets back in return as well. It's an extraordinary correspondence, and some of the poems from this exchange will feature in that volume of Brecht's Poems on Love, which we're bringing out next year. The particular poem now that David is going to read was written in London when Brecht was here in the winter of 1934, alone and missing Grete Steffin. It holds on to a fleeting experience in Covent Garden. Wherever they had been together, and especially in Paris the previous year, Brecht had been in the habit of buying oranges for Steffin. Buying oranges.
In a yellow fog along Southampton Street, suddenly a barrow, a slattern plucking at her paper bags and fruit in lamplight. I stopped, struck dumb, like one who has seen what he was running after there put in his way. Oranges. No thing else could it ever be. I blew some warmth into my hands and quickly fished in my pockets after cash to pay. But then, between the pence being in my grip and glancing at the price there written up in smudged charcoal on newspaper, I caught my own wry whistling undertone. For at that moment, bitterly, this came clear. Of course, you are not anywhere in this town.
And now we return to politics. And first to the Nazi book burnings, and then to the brutalities of 1935, the year of the Nuremberg race laws. The book burnings. When the regime ordered that books with harmful knowledge should be publicly burnt, and all around oxen were forced to drag cartloads of books to the pyre, one banished poet, one of the best, discovered, studying the list of the burnt, to his horror that his books had been forgotten. He hurried to his desk on wings of rage and wrote a letter to the powers that be. "Burn me," he wrote, his pen flying. "Burn me. Don't do this to me. Don't pass me over. Have I not always told the truth in my books? And now I'm treated by you as a liar. I order you, burn me."
Ballad of the Jew's whore, Marie Sanders.
In Nuremberg they made a law, and many a woman wept who lay in bed with the wrong man. They're striking up meat in the townships, the drumming's loud and bright. God in heaven, if there's something brewing, it would be tonight. Mary Sanders, your beloved's hair is much too black. Better not be to him today as you were to him last night. They're striking up meat in the townships, the drumming's loud and bright. God in heaven, if there's something brewing, it would be tonight. Mother, give me the key. It's not so bad as you think. The moon looks just as ever. They're striking up meat in the townships, the drumming's loud and bright. God in heaven, if there's something brewing, it would be tonight. One fine morning at 9, she paraded through the town in her nightshirt, a sign around her neck, hair shorn. The street jeered, her eyes were cold. They're striking up meat in the townships, and Stryker speaks tonight. Good God, if they had but half an ear, they would know what was setting them alight.
Spring, 1938.
Heute, Ostersonntag früh, ging ein plötzlicher Schneesturm über die Insel. Zwischen den grünenden Hecken lag Schnee. Mein junger Sohn holte mich zu einem Aprikosenbäumchen an der Hausmauer, von einem Werk weg, in dem ich auf diejenigen mit dem Finger deutete, die einen Krieg vorbereiteten, der den Kontinent, diese Insel, mein Volk, meine Familie und mich vertilgen mag. Schweigend legten wir einen Sack über den frierenden Baum.
This morning, early, Easter Sunday, there was a sudden snowstorm over the island. Snow lay in between the greening hedges. My young son fetched me out to a little apricot tree against the wall of the house, fetched me from a line of verse in which I was pointing the finger at men preparing a war in which the continent, this island, my people, my family, and I may be erased. In silence, we laid a sack over the freezing tree.
In this next poem, Brecht projects himself in a Dantesque dream into a long tradition of persecuted poets. Visit to the banished poets. When, in a dream, he entered the hut of the banished poets, which you may find alongside the hut where the banished teachers live, from there he heard disputation and laughter. At the entrance, Ovid approached and said to him quietly, "Better not sit down yet. You're not yet dead. Who can know if you won't one day go back, even if nothing has changed except yourself?" But then, solace in his eyes, Po Chu Yi came over and smiled. This is a rigour earned by anyone who even once called injustice by its name. And his friend Tu Fu said softly, "You understand, banishment is not the place to unlearn arrogance." But more worldly, shabby old Villon joined them and asked, "How many doors has the house where you live?" And Dante took him aside and, grasping him hard by the arm, he murmured, "Your verses are teeming with error, friend. Just think what manner of men are gathered against you." Voltaire called over, "Keep an eye on the pennies, they'll starve you out else." "And mix a few jokes in," cried Heine. "That won't help," growled Shakespeare. When James arrived, even I was prevented from writing. "If your case comes to trial, take a rogue for your lawyer," counselled Euripides. "He'll know all the holes in the mesh of the law." The laughter was echoing still when from the darkest corner came a cry. "Hey, you! Do they know your verses by heart? And those who know them, will they prevail and escape persecution?" Those are the forgotten ones, Dante said quietly. In their case, not only their bodies, their works too were destroyed. The laughter broke off. No one dared look over. The newcomer had turned pale.
German war primer.
In the higher echelons, it's considered low to talk of food. That's because they have already eaten. The lowly must depart this life without ever having enjoyed the good meat. To reflect on fine evenings where they have come from and where they are going, they are just too exhausted. They still have not seen the mountains and the ocean when their time is up. If the lowly don't think about their lowliness, they will never rise higher.
The bread of the hungry has been eaten. The meat is long gone. Uselessly the people have sweated. The laurel groves have all been felled. From the chimneys of the munitions factories, smoke rises.
The bosses say peace and war are made of different stuff. But their peace and their war are like wind and storm. War grows from their peace, like a son from his mother. It bears her terrible features. Their war kills only what their peace has left over.
In the calendar, the day is not yet marked. Every month, every day is still free. One of those days will be marked with a cross.
The workers cry out for bread. The traders cry out for markets. The unemployed used to go hungry. Now, the employed go hungry. Hands that lay inactive are stirring again. They are making shells.
Those who take your meat from the table preach contentment. Those for whom the offering is destined demand sacrifice. Those who have eaten their fill speak to the hungry of the great times that are coming. Those who are leading the Reich to the abyss say that ruling is too hard for the ordinary man.
When the top brass speak of peace, the common folk know there'll be war. When the top brass inveigh against war, the draft papers have already been printed.
The top brass have gathered in one room. Man on the street, abandon all hope. The governments are drafting non-aggression pacts. Little man, write your will.
Man with the threadbare coat. In the textile factories, they're weaving a tunic for you, and it won't be you who tears it. You who walk for hours to get to work in tattered shoes. The carriage they're building for you needs walls of steel. For a bowl of milk for your children, steel worker, you're forging a great flask. It won't be filled with milk. Who will drink from it?
On the wall, in chalk, were the words, "They want war." He who wrote it had already fallen.
The top brass are saying, the road leads to glory. In the ranks, they're saying, it leads to the grave.
The war that is coming is not the first. Before it, there were other wars. When the last one was over, there were victors and vanquished. Amongst the vanquished, the lowly folk went hungry. Amongst the victors, the lowly folk went hungry also.
The top brass say, in the army, the nation stands together. Whether that's true, you'll learn in the kitchens. In your hearts, there's to be the same courage, but in your bowls, two different meals.
When it comes to marching, many do not know that it's their enemy marching at their head. The voice that commands them is the voice of their enemy. He who speaks of the enemy is himself the enemy.
General, your tank is a powerful thing. It can break down a forest and crush 100 men. But it has one defect. It needs a driver. General, your bomber is powerful. It flies faster than the wind and can carry more than an elephant. But it has one defect. It needs a mechanic. General, a man can be turned to many uses. He can fly and he can kill. But he has one defect. He can think.
The house painter will say that distant lands are being conquered, but you will sit down in the kitchen to boil turnips. The house painter will say he won't yield an inch, and you will finger the paper-thin cloth of your jacket. When the victory bells ring out, you will deliver the lists of the fallen.
Two sonnets addressed to Margarete Steffin in 1939. And now it's war, and now our way is tougher. You, fellow wayfarer, my given comrade, on level ways or steep, narrow or wide, teacher and taught, both being both together, and both in flight now with a common goal. Know what I know, that this goal's not more than the way itself. So should one of us fall, and the other let him, only setting store on the goal itself, the goal would disappear, become unrecognizable, nowhere known. And breathless at the end, the one arriving there would stand in sweat and a grey nothingness. Here where we are now, at this milestone, I ask the poem's muse to tell you this.
One thing I do not want, you flee from me. Complain, I'll want to hear you anyway. For were you deaf, I should need what you say, and were you dumb, I should need what you see. And blind, I'd want to see you nonetheless, given to watch for me, companion. The way is long, and we're not halfway done. Consider where we are still, in darkness. Leave me, I'm wounded. Is not good enough, and nor is somewhere, only here will do. Take longer with the task, but you can't be let off. You know, whoever's needed is not free. But come whatever may, I do need you. I saying I could just as well say we.
The poem we'll hear next is Children's Crusade, 1939. Brecht wrote this poem in November 1941. By then he was already in America. The first impulse for the poem was a Finnish poem which he had translated called The War Dog from April or May 1941. The situation in that poem is that soldiers in a desperate predicament at the end of 1939 when the Finns were fighting the Soviets, those soldiers send out a dog to get reinforcements. If the dog doesn't find reinforcements, they'll be annihilated. First, when he composed this poem, and more than once thereafter, Brecht thought of it as a possible film script. It was 3 times published during the war. It was translated into English as early as 1943, and Brecht himself attached the photo, which is 3 Polish children found by the Red Army in Charkov, to the poem. The title harks back to the Children's Crusade of 1212, when French and German children, trying to get to the Holy Land, reached Marseille and were then sold into slavery in Alexandria. Brecht dedicated his poem to the memory of Margarete Steffin, who died of exhaustion fleeing from Hitler. She died, as I said, in a Moscow sanatorium the 4th of June 1941, Brecht and his party having continued on their journey on the Trans-Siberian Express. Brecht wanted the poem set to music. In 1943 he approached Kurt Weill without success. The thoughts of it have been film, even novel, a sculpture. This large and various applicability of this great poem has attracted many possible ways of delivering it.
Children's Crusade 1939. War came into Poland in 1939, and there was only a wasteland where house and home had been. The armies took brother from sister and man from wife. In the fire and rubble the child sought the mother and couldn't find her anywhere. Then nothing came out of Poland, no newspaper, no post, but a story, a strange story, circulates in the east.
In an eastern town, snow was falling when they told the story about a children's crusade, and Poland was where it started out. There were children trailing the long roads in troops and passing through the shot-to-pieces villages. Their hungry numbers grew. They were trying to escape the battles and all the nightmare, and one day come to a country where there'd be no more war.
They had a boy for a leader. He cheered them when they were low, but he was worried. He asked himself, which way? And did not know.
A girl of 11 dragged along a little lad of 4, and to make him a good mother, all she wanted was no more war.
And on the march was a Jewish boy with velvet at his throat, and he was used to white bread, but he found his own 2 feet.
And 2 little brothers, great strategists, marched in that campaign, stormed an empty shed, but lost it to the overwhelming rain.
And one lad sidled along apart. He was the thin grey one. A terrible blame was eating him. He came from a Nazi legation.
A music maker was with them. He found a drum in a smashed-up store, but couldn't play it. The rat-a-tat-tat would have told the world where they were.
They captured a dog to kill and eat, they said, but hadn't the heart to do it. So they fed him instead.
They opened a school. A little girl was writing the hard word friend, I before E, on a busted tank, and never reached the end.
And they did have a concert of music by a winter stream that roared, and the drummer boy was allowed to drum, because he couldn't be heard.
A girl of 11, a boy of 15, they had a love affair. In a house and home the guns had smashed, she combed his hair. The love couldn't live. The cold came on, too cold. And tell me how the little trees should blossom under so much snow.
And there was even a war with another troop of children, but they left off fighting when they saw there was no sense in it. And while they were still battling for a smashed plate layer's hut, the story goes one side ran out of things to eat, and that when the other side heard of this, they sent them a sack of spuds, because the side that has not cannot fight, as well as the side that has. Also, there was a court case. It proceeded uneasily. By the shining light of 2 candles, they found the judge guilty.
And there was even a helping hand. Help never hurt anyone. A girl in service showed them how to bath a little one. But she only had 2 hours to teach them the things she knew, because her master and mistress wanted seeing to.
And also there was a funeral of a boy with a velvet coat. 2 Poles and 2 Germans carried the coffin out. Protestants, Catholics, Nazis were there to close the grave, and a little socialist gave a speech of the future of those still alive. So there was faith and hope, and not only bread and meat, and let nobody blame them for thieving, who gave them nothing to eat, and let nobody blame the poor man who turned them from his door. When it's 50, it's not self-sacrifice you need for them, but flour. You come across 2 or maybe 3, you help them, and gladly. But who can sit them down to eat when there are so many?
In a shelled and rubbled farmhouse they found a sack of flour. An 11-year-old tied her apron round and baked hour after hour. They chopped wood for the oven, stirred and kneaded the dough, but they couldn't get it to rise because none of them knew how. The best they could, they were heading south. South is where you see the sun at noon. It is straight ahead when there's any sun to see.
They found a wounded soldier in a pine wood. There he lay. They tended him for 7 days, so he'd show them the way. He said they should head for Belgorod. There was fever in his wound. He died on them on the 8th day, and they dug him into the ground. And of course there were still signposts, though muffled under snow. But all turned round so they didn't point the right way to go. And that was for military reasons, and not in cruel fun. But how should they find Bilgeray in the wrong direction?
They stood around their little leader. Snow filled the air. He peered ahead and pointed. It must be over there.
One night they saw a fire. They kept away, and then once 3 tanks went rolling by, with human beings in.
And once, when they came near a town, they made a detour round and hid by day and walked by night till the town was left behind.
Where southeast Poland used to be, the 55 children were seen in drifts and driving snow, and then never again. When I close my eyes, I see them trekking on and on and on, from one farmstead to another, shelled to pieces, everyone. And above them in the clouds I see new larger crowds. They process against the wind, toilingly, homeless, directionless, looking for a land of peace, without thunder, without the fire, not like the land they are coming from. They are more and more and more. Vast numbers, and in the twilight, I see that they have become the children of every race and clime who want peace and a house and home.
In Poland that January, a dog was caught. It had a cardboard round its scraggy neck, with writing on that said,
"Please help us. We are lost. We can't find the way anymore. We are 55. The dog will lead you to where we are. And if you can't come, drive him away. Don't shoot at him. He is the only living creature who knows the way to us."
The writing was a child's. Peasants read it aloud. That was a 1.5 years ago. The dog hungered and died.
Song of a German mother.
My son, I bought you the jackboots and the brown shirt as well. But if I'd known what I now know, I'd rather have hanged myself. My son, when I saw that hand of yours lifted up in the Hitler salute, I didn't know the hand that salutes that man would dry up like fruit in a drought. My son, I saw you marching away in Hitler's train, and didn't know then who went forth with him will never come back again. I saw you wearing a brown shirt, never said what I should have said, for I did not know what I now know, that you would wear it dead.
As we've already heard, Brecht and his family moved through Scandinavia during the war, fleeing the advancing armies. In early summer 1941, they eventually arrived in Santa Monica. Brecht stayed in the States for 6 years. He created 2 cycles of poems to which he gave the title War Primer, Kriegsfibel. The first in 1936 and 37, from which we've already heard some extracts, and the second now actually during the war. Brecht had come up with a new poetic form, which he called a photoepigram. It consisted of an image of the current conflict as it was raging around the world and Brecht was very interested in the war in Africa, the Far East, as well as in Europe. These images, nearly all press photographs, and many of them drawn from Life magazine. And then below the picture was a 4-line verse, an epigram, in quite an elevated style that serves not just as a caption, but also as a commentary, a critical commentary on the photograph. So we'll give you now 3 of those photo epigrams from the war primer. With the third, you'll see not just the image, but a photograph of the actual page as Brecht and his assistant Ruth Berlau cut and pasted it. A sheet of black card with the photographs, and then down below the original typescript. And then after those 3 photo epigrams, it's back to Europe, the return to Europe and Germany in the immediate aftermath of war. First of all then, war primer.
O soul voice crying from the double choir of bonded doers and those they do it to. Woman, the Son of Heaven needs Singapore, and nobody needs your son but you.
No towns, no seas, no sparkling of starlight, and never a wife and never to have a son. Neither the darkening heavens nor the bright. Not over Japan, not over Oregon.
You in your tanks and bombers, warriors sweating in Algiers, freezing in Lapland's ice, coming from 100 battles as conquerors. We are the ones you conquered. Oh, rejoice. Homecoming.
And how will I find you? Town where I was born? Following the swarms of bombers, I am coming home. Where is my town? Where the monstrous mountains of smoke stand. That in the fires, there, that is my town. How am I likely to be received in my hometown? The bombers arrive ahead of me. Lethal swarms announce the sun's return. Infernos are my harbingers.
A poem written in peacetime in 1945 when the war had finished. The title, War Has Been Brought into Disrepute. I hear it is being said in respectable circles that from the moral point of view, the Second World War did not come up to the first. The Wehrmacht is said to deplore the means by which the SS effected the extermination of certain peoples. In the Ruhr, it seems, the captains of industry regret the bloody razzias they filled their mines and factories with slaves. The intelligentsia, so I hear, condemn the industrialists' demands for such slave workers and their shabby treatment. Even the bishops are distancing themselves from this way of waging war. In short, on all sides there is a feeling that, unfortunately, the Nazis have done us a disservice, and that war, of itself a natural and necessary thing, by being conducted on this occasion in so heedless and indeed inhuman a fashion, has been and will be for quite some time discredited.
Epilogue to Arturo Ui.
You folk must learn to see, not just to gawp and act, instead of wasting time with talk. That creature one time nearly ruled the world. nations met to defeat him. Yet don't be too sure we've overcome the threat. The wounds still fertile, out of which it crawled.
The next poem is called Children's Anthem. It dates from 1950. The context is the re-adoption by West Germany, despite its perversion by the Nazis, of the familiar German national anthem, which we tend to know as Deutschland, Deutschland über alles, although formally only the third stanza, which doesn't include those words, was the official anthem. In 1950 then Brecht was moved to write a response and an alternative national anthem. It follows the same form as Hoffmann von Fallersleb's Deutschlandlied, and it would fit Haydn's music too. But in fact, Brecht's friend Hans Eisler composed a new score. It was Eisler who has provided most of the music for this evening. A score which, like Brecht's own words, makes ironic allusion to the Deutschlandlied. This song was well known in the GDR, but it never became the national song there either. And in 1990, after the reunification, there was talk of taking it as the anthem of the newly unified Germany in place of the Deutschlandlied. It's a strikingly modest and historically aware anthem for a new and decent post-war patriotism.
Let's not want for grace or passion, nor for effort, nor for wit, that a decent German nation grow and flourish as is fit, that the other countries need not shrink in horror or disgust, but might rather stretch their arms out as they do to all the rest, as they do to all the rest, and not over, nor yet under other nations would we be, from the Rhine and to the Oder, from the Alps and to the sea. And because we want it better, we will nurture, guard and care. May we always love our country, just as others cherish theirs, just as others cherish theirs.
To finish, we have a poem that Brecht wrote in the year before he died. I'll read it first in German and then say a word about it, and then we'll have it to finish in English. Und ich dachte immer, die allereinfachsten Worte müssen genügen. Wenn ich sage, was ist, muss jedem das Herz zerfleischt sein. Dass du untergehst, wenn du dich nicht wehrst, das wirst du doch einsehen. Brecht had been a believer in reason throughout his life and had opposed reason and intelligent argument and the rational structures of many of his poems, the dialectic structure. He'd opposed that against the violent hysteria of National Socialism, believing that to be a complete aberration from the best possibilities of human reasoning. The first couple of lines of this, nearly the last poem really, seem to be expressing a great sadness that reason has after all not been enough against the forces of completely unleashed hysteria. The last two lines, though, it's as though he reminds himself that there is a struggle, the struggle continues, and that only by fighting back will you not go under.
And I always thought the very simplest words would be enough. If I say what is, every heart will surely be lacerated. That you'll go under if you don't fight back. Surely you must see that.